No, Joe, I remember when I first moved to Florida many years ago, the first time it dropped below 60, I was at an event called Zufari, and people showed up, particularly the women in their leather coats, their gloves and turtlenecks. I went, this seems odd. It's like 65 degrees. They're like, yes, welcome to
you're in
Florida.
a button-down t-shirt, so
I just had a light sport jacket on or something. That was a charity event, but yeah, that was my introduction to winter in Florida.
we take advantage any chance we get to put out the winter fashion we have to take. So, well, it's noon. It's noon, so welcome everybody to another Department of Internal Medicine Roy Benke Grand Rounds. I'm delighted to turn it over to Dr. Fayed Youssef, our interim vice chair of operations, and he's going to introduce our two speakers. And again, a lot of excitement and anticipation for today's talk. And so, with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fayed Youssef. Thank you, Fayed.
Thank you, Dr. Lazam. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody, or good noon, since it's right on 12. So today's topic we started to talk about back in July as part of our 3 missions when we took over the department. There's clinical delivery, there is teaching, there is research. And what we noticed with the research was that it was a little disjointed, a lot of people doing their own thing, not having either the resources or knowing where the resources were within the department. And we said, why don't we have a nice overview of what we're trying to build in the Department of Internal Medicine, and who better to deliver that message than Amanda McNamara, and Jesse will be joining. Jesse, are you on here yet? Hopefully she'll be here soon, if not already. There you go, Jessica Burgess. So quick address. I think everyone knows these two very high performing women, but Amanda McNamara, I guess you're from Iowa City. I did not know you were from Iowa, or at least from Iowa. Started her academic career there, got a BA in health and human physiology, moved to Tampa, where she started her professional career here at USF as a nurse for the urology department, then was the lead pulmonary nurse, and then transitioned over to clinical research for Tampa General before moving north to Pittsburgh for several years, where she continued her track in the clinical research domain before we were able to recruit her back as Associate Director of Clinical Research Operations. And so I think we are very fortunate to have someone of her expertise and talent. I'm going to mute, maybe get her mute on, please. Have someone of her caliber guiding us through clinical research. And then for those of you who have not met Jessica Burgess, our administrator, another very talented person, started her academic journey at, was it Western Kentucky or Eastern Kentucky? Which Kentucky?
Eastern.
Which one? Eastern, where she was a student athlete, played volleyball. She continued her education. She has an MBA in health management from USF, a Master of Science in Biology, Cellular, Molecular, and Microbiology from Eastern Kentucky, and has been in higher ed for most of her career, other than a short stint in medical devices. So we are very fortunate to have the two of them. One thing I do want to establish, because I know that this topic, similar to some of the financial topics that have come up in other settings, as, oh, I don't know if it's been controversial, but is certainly brought out emotions, enthusiasm, vigor, which is fine. We want to make sure that the communications on these, the questions, the commentary remains professional. We have, speaking on behalf of Dr. Van Leveren, the utmost respect and confidence in both of them managing the portfolio. I have heard very positive things from folks that have grown their research endeavors thanks to these two. So understanding the finances, understanding the processes, how to get started in research. For students, this is where you start. You volunteer for a project. For junior faculty, you are helping on research projects. For mid-career faculty, you should be a co-PI, and senior faculty, we expect you to have your own studies if this is a path that you want to pursue. And these are the two people that are going to get you there. So I know they've got a lot to cover and there'll be some good dialogue. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and Jessica. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Lizama and Dr. Youssef. And thanks for everyone for joining us today to talk about internal medicine clinical research operations. As with most grand rounds, they always ask what our objectives are. Just want to outline them here for everyone on the call. We hope by the end of the presentation, you will be able to understand our current clinical research infrastructure, understand what our clinical trial intake workflow currently looks like, and also understand the contacts associated and the key players involved in clinical research here at USF. And then additionally, we're going to talk about the financial information for F&A and rollovers. We'll describe all of that later and understand how those currently flow in and out into the department and into additional accounts. A long agenda here. I always like to itemize this out while I'm trying to put a presentation together, but I will not go through all of it for you. Dr. Youssef, you did such a great introduction for me. You've made this slide very easy. As he mentioned, I did graduate from the University of Iowa with a bachelor's with health and human physiology and a minor in human relations 10 years ago. Sure doesn't feel like that long ago. Shortly thereafter, I did start my employment here at USF as an LPN for UMSA, actually working in the urology department. I would have never left except for there wasn't a growth opportunity there. Internal medicine at that time did have an opportunity in a lead position in pulmonary, and I loved the patient population very much. I was very passionate about pulmonary hypertension patients, and around that time, they opened up a center at Tampa General where all of those patients were transitioned to. Because of that, I lost my favorite patient population, and one of the investigators said, "Hey, I'm losing my research coordinator at Tampa General. How about you come on over and work with me over there?" And so when I started at Tampa General in 2018, I was a coordinator managing the pulmonary hypertension clinical research over there. Which was a great avenue for me. I didn't know the world of research existed, and I'm happy that I did that. Early in COVID times, I did receive an offer of employment for the University of Pittsburgh, where I served as their implementation specialist, project manager on some of our platform trials and many of our COVID trials that we did across a 40 hospital system. We participated in a lot of research in such a short time. I'm sure many researchers on this call did a lot of work in only 2 to 3 years. It was no different there at Pitt. I was eventually promoted to an assistant director of our research core there. And then March of this year, I had the great opportunity of coming back to USF to work with everyone here. And Tampa just feels like home to me. So I'm very happy to be back.
And I'm Jessie Burgess. I'm the department administrator. So I didn't go too far back, but just starting from when I got my master's degree. So I have a master's of science in cellular molecular microbiology. A little known fact is research background. So I worked as a quality control microbiologist and chemist for industry for a pharmaceutical company, doing bench research there. Then I went into patient transitional care, sales and marketing, moved down here to Florida, but I started at USF in 2015 as a unit research administrator. Then I turned into the chief admin for the Department of Mathematics and Statistics in the College of Arts and Sciences as a manager of fiscal and business. I was also teaching, I think, 4 classes a semester in cellular, molecular, and microbiology. Overachiever, always multiple jobs at that time. This was before kids. But in 2018, I took a position in infectious disease, managing their basic research portfolio and the interdisciplinary sciences building. Expanded from there into leading the division as an admin and then overseeing multiple divisions. I was asked to oversee research for the department. And then in 2021, I had applied to the open department administrator position, and I've been in that role since then. And then just to correct Dr. Youssef, is I'm actually finishing my MBA, hopefully this spring. So thanks for the introduction, Amanda.
Thanks, Jesse. So we're going to kick it off by just discussing our current research infrastructure, which I have done my best to outline here. We currently have teams in allergy, cardiology, infectious disease. We also have now created a North Clinical Research Team and a South Clinical Research Team. Those are truly grouped by geographical location. We have the North Clinical Research Team that's housed across the street from Morsani in the faculty office building. This would be overseeing research for hematology, gastroenterology, and general internal medicine. The South Clinical Research Team resides at STC, or if you're not familiar with that terminology, it's across the street from Tampa General in the USF Health building. That team currently is primarily serving pulmonary. However, they will also serve nephrology and rheumatology as trials begin to open up there, because those clinics and operations are in this general vicinity. We also have an infectious disease research administration group that is overseen by Brent. And then we also have Brenda Flam, who I believe most people are very familiar with. She's the assistant professor of research for our department. Last but not least, we do have a small central services team, which Gabriel is included in, who serves as our study start specialist, and we'll talk much more about that in the upcoming slides. Our current research portfolio, this is our current breakdown as of the end of last week. As you can see here, pulmonary is the shining star with the most open trials at this time. Cardiology has the most in the pipeline. And there are a few others there, rheumatology, nephrology, GIM, that look a little less robust at this time. Our goal is to hopefully get some more trials in their portfolios over the next year. Nephrology does have two active trials, but those will be closing out shortly. But just wanted to give a snapshot of where we're going in the future. Total overall, we're at 118 open trials across all of internal medicine, and then 66 in the pipeline, as we like to say, or in study startup. My goal would be to hopefully increase this substantially within 1 year from now, but I can talk through those goals moving forward. A little bit on our Q1 reports. I hope to have something more formal to report in the future. This is just a quick snapshot of enrollments by division for July, August, and September. Our fiscal year is a little bit different than Tampa General, so this Q1 reporting may look different if you see numbers on both sides of the street. You can see here, I might want to call out that cardiology may look a little less productive than maybe it has in the past. We have hit a few barriers with lack of echo access and a few other testing mechanisms that have impacted our enrollment, which we are working through almost on a weekly basis. And we're beginning to resume those recruitments and enrollments and being increasingly productive. So I expect to see these numbers increase. Hematology also looks a little low on Q1. We are going through some staffing transitions. Roxana has retired, and we are bringing on new staff to support that with the North team infrastructure. So I also anticipate those numbers to increase in the Q2. And then, as I mentioned previously, nephrology and GIM, there are really no actively recruiting trials, so we hope for that to change as well. A little disclaimer here, emergency medicine is the highest enroller. A lot of these trials are being either transitioned to USF or they're being transitioned to a different provider at TGH after Dr. Jason Wilson's transition to USF. So that might be a little bit more overinflated because some of those, that's all of emergency medicine. But in the future, I hope to have that more specific. Here's a Q1 revenue reporting broken down by division and totals as well. I did want to add this in here as we work towards more fiscal transparency. I know that that's been a request of many of our faculty members, And so we hope to start to roll out more processes that put numbers in your inboxes or in meetings that you attend regularly. The department does have centralized resources and services for research, and I just wanted to review those with most on this call because what we have found is that the Department of Internal Medicine is so large. If you don't know the resources exist, you may look for them elsewhere and not know that you can actually have some of those efforts taken care of by teams that are already in place. One of those being if you have an investigator-initiated trial that you might be requesting assistance from a pharma company or funding from an external source, we can help you with that. We can help you with the budgeting for that. So we include all of the administrative costs and the appropriate overhead. So that way, once you get that award from that pharma company, you understand where those costs may or may not go, and kind of what the administrative needs are, the staffing needs are to operationalize that project. I have a global overview of a lot of processes across all of the divisions, and so happy to help support that. I've helped Dr. Matar and others, so if you need anything, let me know. Also, we're trying to do a much better job of looking at the fiscal and budgetary component of these trials when they come through our intake. I think historically, we've all been so excited about research. We want to take on any project, right? We're excited to do the work. But what we're really trying to do now is make sure that the costs of that trial are covered by the pharma industries that are doing it. We understand there's going to be some subawards from NIH and other institutions, or maybe it's a little less funded, a little underfunded, and we want to participate in those too. But keep in mind that for those pharma companies, those big multi-million-dollar companies that are out there, we want to make sure that they're paying an adequate amount for what effort we need to provide. That way, we can also support some of those less funded opportunities that are really important to the academic mission. We also provide hiring support. Most of the hiring comes through us centrally for a few reasons. One, we can determine whether we can hyper-resource utilize someone else that may not be as needed in another area. Did funding end on a project? There might be an opportunity to get you someone to work on your project sooner based on what we already have, rather than going through the posting process. We all know that takes a long time. So if there's anything we can do to support you sooner, this is the way I think it's best to do that. It also takes away some of the administrative burden of filling out that paperwork, filling out the PIQ, submitting that, doing all of the reference checks and all of that. Happy to help support with that. And then we can also determine whether your division can support it with research funding. Is there enough funding to support a whole other person? What is the fringe rate? Are they staff? Are they administrative? We can help with all of that. Another item that the department, I would say Gabriel's role has been really successful in, the study startup specialist, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is OCR alignment. OCR has done a great job of breaking down assistance with budgets and contracts, regulatory, but we're really striving as a department to align with them and work on our processes together. We've had frequent meetings with their teams to optimize workflows on both sides to make sure we're not replicating efforts and that our teams are working synergistically together. We're meeting with regulatory weekly on the USF side, biweekly with TGH. Budgets and contracts has been a biweekly meeting, which I think has been really impactful for every person that's on there. Happens to be one of my favorite meetings that we have. I think it's really decreasing our startup times, and then we're meeting with the intake teams on a monthly basis. I say we, often these are spearheaded by our centralized shop and Gabriel's role in study startup. The department is also able to assist with the finances. We want to optimize and make real-time pay distributions. We do this because all of our research staff are paid for by clinical trial funding. So if they're working on a project, our goal is to make sure that part of their pay distribution for that time frame is paid partially to the projects that they're actually working on. We find that to be important so that way we can optimize those budgets and make sure that the resources are being utilized appropriately. We also want to make sure that invoices are being paid on time. A lot of the team has been undergoing a massive process with OCR to make sure that all of our back invoices have been paid, that our billing processes are improving, and that we're getting up to speed on all of the accounts with Tampa General and other vendors. They also do a lot of reconciling of accounts. In the future, we hope that we'll have a much more financial transparency, as I just mentioned before. And then we also do study startup assistance. And then my role as well, I'm here to help anyone with their research mission, with workflow optimization, any strategic planning that you may need. And then I can also help you identify site locations and resources that you may not be aware of, because I work with all the groups. One of my personal favorite things to talk about is study startup, because I think it's been a pain point for most of them. I put this here to be funny because I get probably 5 to 6 calls a week about when can we start this trial. It doesn't matter whether someone sent it to me a week ago, 7 months ago, 12 months ago. They always want to know, when can we start? And let me tell you about that process so you can understand the complexities that go into it. And we want you to start as soon as possible too, but this is everything we have to do to get there. And I won't turn it around, but it still made me laugh, especially because I have a newer child at home. We heard your feedback. Many people have said how long this process takes, how painful it can be. We don't want to make it painful for anyone. We want you to know that we heard your feedback and we are working on it. The department decided to invest in the study startup specialist role and my role. And so our workflow is that every brand new trial that you want to participate in, send it to Gabe, myself, or even the study startup email. We have a centralized email inbox you can use. If you don't remember who to send it to, you could send it to this email. Let us know that you're interested, and essentially we'll take it from there. We will loop you in at all the appropriate points. We will talk to all the OCR teams. We will talk to the study team that's appropriate. We'll essentially take care of the rest. A quick important reminder that any USF physician must initiate the study through USF startup practices, which means USF OCR or Office of Sponsored Research, and through the department. We definitely partner with Tampa General. We utilize them for many of our trials, but we have to facilitate the startup through USF first, and then we can facilitate the startup in parallel through Tampa General when we need to. There are a lot of words on this slide. I will not read them all to you, but essentially the whole entire purpose of this role is to oversee the startup activities, liaise with all of the other clinical research professionals, and make sure we're doing this in a compliant manner. We want this person to act as a central line of communication for all relevant stakeholders, because as we mentioned before, we have contracts, budgets, regulatory, Tampa General feasibility and intake, but we need a conductor of all of those teams to make sure every piece of that puzzle gets done so we can get to startup as soon as possible. Oh, I forgot that I put an animation on this. Many of you who have worked here over the last 6 months have met Gabriel. He serves in this capacity for us. And I think he's been doing a really great job, and he's getting great feedback from everybody. We hope that this will be an opportunity to track all new incoming studies. We would like to track these metrics moving forward. So in 6 months or longer, we can have metrics to explain to you how long it's taking for a startup, so we can get back to sponsors more specifically when they ask that with more real information. We want them to be that centralized hub between the sponsor and the CRO, so that way there is not 5 methods of communication going back and forth. There's like a centralized staff member to do that. They also help with the feasibility review. They help your study teams get back to seeing patients faster. And we want them to maintain consistent communication with the faculty about where their projects are. We believe that this is improving organization of our processes, and it creates more efficient workflows for all of us, and it decreases the workload on the study teams. This is a very, very small picture, but I really just wanted to demonstrate that we have developed this massive tracking system to track every study that is in startup. So if you contact us, we can look in here, and this is almost as real time as it gets. It's updated every week, and anytime anything happens, we should know where your study is. And with all those additional meetings that we are having, this is updated in real time and helps us remind those what our needs are. Really fun thing about this that Gabriel loves is that there is an alarm system on it. The color is on the right-hand side. If there hasn't been an update for 1 week or 2 weeks, it's going to change to a different color to notify us that we need some sort of progress on that. I just like to show it because it's pretty to look at, but just want you all to know we can find the information you need pretty quickly. Small overview of just how complex study startup can be. It really doesn't start when you just say, hey, I'm interested in this study. I know sometimes it feels like it does, but the beginning is really you're letting us know that you're interested. Then you send over the CDA, or the company sends over the NDA or CDA. If you're a faculty, please do not sign that. We don't want you to sign that. We need to make sure that USF Legal has their eyes on it. USF Legal has the appropriate language in there so that way they can approve for you to sign that. So if you send that to the study startup team, they will help the technology transfer office and OCR get that process rolling for you, and then they'll let you know when to sign it. After that, we do a feasibility questionnaire that is operationalized by the centralized team. We do a site qualification visit. After that, when they decide to site select us, that's when your determination is whether we move forward with this project or not. You can always decide not to complete the project any farther, but that's usually when we kind of make that determination. We need to receive 3 items for this study to be in the startup process. It's the draft budget, the draft CTA, and the final protocol, which means if it's a pharma or a device, it needs to be an FDA approved protocol. We can walk you through all of that and let you know. We've had a few of these studies come through that don't have FDA approved protocols, which means that the FDA may have comments or updates. And so we don't start that process because it might be a lot of unnecessary work. Then if you agree to the trial from there, that's actually when study intake begins. And sometimes it takes a month or 2 for that process to happen because the sponsor might not be ready. So just want to be transparent about when that intake process truly begins. And then at that point, it can go into 2 different avenues. It's either USF startup only if it doesn't touch TGH at all. And if we utilize Tampa General in any capacity, their data, their lab, their pharmacy, anything, then we have to do the USF TGH startup process. So after USF startup process, all of these items must happen, but they can all happen in parallel. The study team has to review internal feasibility. They liaise with the PI. They complete regulatory and other documents for some internal processes that they have. The regulatory team gets started with their informed consent creation. They complete regulatory documents, local IRB submission, and then central as well. I might have left that part out. The budgets team also works in parallel, but they have to develop that budget. They review all of the protocol work with the centralized team and the study team. They negotiate that budget on your behalf, and then they receive approval there. And contract team also working in parallel. So that's the good thing to say, is that everyone can work in parallel. So it is a complex process, but with a good conduction system, we can actually get this done in a more efficient way. So we cannot hold an SIV until we have the final approved budget and the fully executed CTA. So I know that there's a lot of pressure to get this SIV on the books, but just know if the central team or the study team is pushing back saying we need to wait, it's because we really want those budgeted items to be completed and we want that contract to be in place. We want to make sure that when the SIV happens, we're ready to recruit and all of the final pieces are in place. SIV does not mean we can enroll, however. It does mean that we need to wait for USF approval and sponsor approval, and then we can recruit. If you need to utilize Tampa General in any capacity, all of the same from the previous slide applies with the addition of TGH intake. So we also have to do a separate submission to Tampa General, which is facilitated centrally, and they will go through their intake and feasibility process. And all of that can still happen in parallel with all of the USF processes. The only difference here is that we also need Tampa General approval to enroll before we can start. I want to talk a little bit about our budget team, who are always working in the background, but doing really hard work for us and the importance of the work that they do. Led by Melissa, she's the Assistant Director of Pre-Award. She has a much larger team than this, I'm certain, but these are the ones that I'm familiar with that serve internal medicine. Josh, Brittany, and Mark, we work with them very closely. Many things go into this budget development, and I think sometimes they get heat when our budgets look high or our budgets include a lot of institutional costs that we have. But little insight to what goes into that. There are multiple internal forms that we fill out, which I will not explain on this call, but Gabriel or other study team members will do that. If they work with Tampa General, a Medicare coverage analysis will need to be included. They do a full and lengthy protocol review. They assist with information on vendors and explaining on how much each item is going to cost. What's really important about their work is they need to make sure that our overheads are covered, that our administrative startup is covered, that everything is covered. And so they may build a budget that the sponsor doesn't like. And it's very common for the sponsor to push back as a negotiation tactic, but they're really out there serving us, doing what we need them to do to make sure that the project can support what we need and the providers as well. Then they go through a negotiation process, and then once that budget is approved, then they would work towards finalizing the CTA. We have a contracts team as well who also works very hard for us and many other departments. Recently promoted to assistant director, I believe, is Yesenia leading this team. You all have probably heard from Reagan, Christina, or Emily in the past, always working to facilitate our contracts for us. Their process is that they receive the draft CTA. They do an initial language review. If there are any concerns with what that language is or what we're agreeing to, they're sending that to the study team. They're sending that to the PI. So it's important that the sooner we get back to their questions, the sooner they can get their language finalized. Some of these steps in the process get delayed because we're not as responsive. So sometimes the lack of startup productivity comes from that. Then they include USF legal language. It's very important because this contract will be a USF contract. They send to the sponsor for a review, and then they receive feedback from sponsor, and then they hold on that until the budget is completed. Once the budget is completed, they'll route the signatures to complete that CTA. Our USF OCR clinical research regulatory team is led by Luis. He's the assistant director there. I'm certain many of you know him. And his team, these are the ones that, the small part of his team that's helped serve internal medicine, Christine, Taylor, and Amber. They do a wonderful job for us and wanted to ensure that everyone knew who they were. There are multiple pathways for regulatory from your projects. You may have different experiences on this. You can either have a single IRB reliance with a USF study only. You can have a single IRB reliance for USF Tampa General study, or you can do a BOLS or local IRB only. A regulatory process for single IRB is outlined here. Essentially, we take the regulatory team takes the informed consent form. They make our local edits that are necessary and any updates that they require. They send it back to the sponsor. The sponsor has to approve what we call red lines or our updates. Once they do so, it is our local institutional regulation that we have to actually submit this to our local IRB for their approval to see to a central or a single IRB. And then once they do approve that, then the regulatory team can submit this to a central IRB. The difference with this one is that we would only include USF language at this point in time. And then once the central IRB is approved, then their process is kind of complete with startup. The difference is if there is a Tampa General component, it's this very similar process. We would just make sure to include Tampa General HIPAA injury and cost language in there. And I know that Luis had mentioned, I think maybe last week or the previous week, they're working on a joint language. So that way we can streamline those processes. And then maybe there'll only be 2 pathways moving forward. The more lengthy process is actually utilizing BOLS IRB only. And if we're utilizing BOLS IRB only, that's often completed by the study team or the PIs themselves. And so that does look a little bit different. We would still redline or update those informed consent forms. We would still send for the sponsor approval. We would complete a full BOLS IRB application, and then they would go to a full board review. They would send their comments and feedback to the study team for updates. We would enter the required requests, and then we would submit that for approval. This is kind of a long and lengthy process. At the end of this presentation, I have slides on how to do a BOLS IRB submission. So if you're interested in the slides, just reach out to me and I can send them to you, but I'm not going to go through it on this call. USF intake, the USF OCR is where we send all of our studies to start up. As I mentioned before, if you're a USF provider, we must start here. If you send it to us, we'll send it to OCR, or you can add them when you add us. Either way is just fine. The intake coordinator is Melody Spencer, and their email is pretty easy to remember. It's ocr@usf.edu. If we do utilize TGH OCR, they also have their own intake team and feasibility who we work with regularly. Adam Bradshaw is the clinical research supervisor there, and Lady McIntyre is the program coordinator who really help us. They're very integral to our research operations that hit Tampa General. And their process is in addition to all of our USF processes. There's additional forms that we fill out. It's called an RSPF. That's what kicks off the submission to Tampa General. And then there are multiple stepwise feasibility that they complete for us if you use investigational drug services, IT, if you use their TGH core coordination services, imaging. Lainey and Adam really help drive that process there to make sure that we have the appropriate stamp of approval to be in any of those units. And then the Medicare coverage analysis is completed by their team over there. And they're really helpful determining what sponsors should pay for, what can go to insurance. And then they do a full meeting to get together with the PI, all of the unit managers, and the study team before they give their approval, which we can do all of this in parallel with our USF processes. Then the very final thing I'll say about study startup is that all of these approvals are required to begin the project to get to enrollment. TGH must approve if we go through TGH. That's a formal stamp of approval. Then USF will approve, and the sponsor needs to activate us, and then we can begin recruitment. I just wanted to share all of this information to understand the complexities that come with study startup. And as much as we would love to just start the project, we have to go through all of those steps first. I will pause now and let Jesse take over to talk about F&A.
Thanks, guys. We're going to talk about facilities and administrative cost rates. We just put interchangeably. They're known as, indirects, overheads, F&A, facilities and administration. It's all the same thing. So this is basically cost for facilities and administrative costs. These research administrators, some of our space that we have, supplies, equipment, general purpose items. So that is part of an indirect cost rate agreement. We have the link if anyone is interested, but we follow the university guidelines as far as what percentages we need to include in our budgetary items. Some of the grants or proposal submissions will have limits. We'll use those limits, but oftentimes we use a rate based on if it's on campus, within a certain space. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So we have research on campus. You can see that our newest rates have increased only for the research on campus from 49.5 to 50%. There are definitions for adjacent and remote, and then sponsored research on campus. You guys will usually see the 34.5. So for all intents and purposes, since we're focusing on clinical research, that's the number that you'll see most frequently. So our administrative personnel, when we're working with you on budgets, will work with you guys on the most appropriate rate that needs to be factored in. Go ahead. All right. So this is a timeline of the department. So just to disclose, in this particular slide, we're talking about the indirect cost rates for clinical research. So of that total 35% that is charged, there's a certain distribution of those funds that go to different areas. So 25% of it will go to USF Research and Innovation. 25% of it goes to the Office of Clinical Research, and then 50% of it comes back to the department. Right now, the department has a blanket rule of thumb that for fixed price residuals and F&A, we do split it 50-50 with the PI. So this 50% that we receive, that dollar amount will be split with the lead PI on that project. Go to the next slide. So where does the money go? So just using an example, if it's 2000, if Dr. Restrepo has a study and he's getting a payment of 2,303, then 35% of that equals $806, goes towards an F&A expense that will collect in a pool. Facilities and administration costs come back all in one lump sum to the department one time a year. That usually takes place after the holiday, so January or February. And that time this year in 2024 will be the deposits for fiscal year 23. So we're always kind of a year behind. There is a tracking for it, so we make sure that those get deposited into individual PI accounts that can be used for their own discretion. So we have the same thing for Office of Sponsored Research, or more of our federal. This would be more in line with basic science because we do have federal clinical, which most often goes through the Office of Clinical Research as well now, recently. So in this case, it's the same thing, although it's split a little differently. It looks like this slide isn't up to date, so my apologies. We will have to get it out, but it's roughly about 6 or 7% that comes back to the department out of that whole lump sum. So 50% is taxed. Thank you. Yeah, here's one example. So of that 100% of the total pie of, for every dollar spent, 50% is taken off. About 80% of it will go to the Office of Research and Innovation. About 13% goes to the individual college, and then only about 7% comes back to the department. And of that percent that the department receives, we split that 50% with the PI. So right now it's averaging to be about 3.5% in F&A that the PI receives into their own accounts. Now, this may change over time. The distributions may be split differently. They kind of change from year to year. But right now, that's the current flow of funds. So clinical trial residuals, rollover funds. We either have cost reimbursable type of grants or projects, which is, every dollar spent, you invoice the sponsor, and then anything unused goes back to them. Most of our clinical trials are under a fixed price model. You agree to a budget, you get a payment per patient, and then whatever's left over and unused, we get to keep. So of those studies that close out, if there's $10,000 that roll over, again, we split it 50-50 with the principal investigator. So here's just one such example, a closeout summary. The closeouts need to be 50% will be split, but we also want to ensure that any outstanding billing and payments have been processed before we actually close in full. So you guys know that when a CTA or the IRB, et cetera, is closed, then the project is closed. But before we actually roll over the funds, Amanda and her team have been doing a really good job of making sure that any outstanding balances are resolved. And we're picking up on that timeline much faster because our whole goal is we want to put more money in your pockets. So all of the accounts, all of the money that the department keeps or goes into the piggy banks of the individual providers, we've revamped the utilization of it, and we make sure that every penny is used directly to support research endeavors. So this is if you'll go back one more, Amanda, I apologize. The slide over to the left, forward one. The rollovers, this one, yes, thank you. So this closeout summary to the left, this is an example for Dr. Seminario. This comes in an email format from the Office of Clinical Research, and they'll ask us to vet and verify and then give permission to roll over the funds. Amanda's making sure that the PIs are notified when we receive these closeout summaries so that they're made aware when accounts are deposited into their funds. Go ahead. Okay, so a lot of people want to know, why do we tax 50%? Ultimately, our goal would be in the future to be self-sustainable and decrease that amount. But just to give an overview of what the funds are currently used for is administrative research staff. You know, it takes money to make money. So we need to develop the infrastructure to support you guys in your research endeavors. Historically, we've had issues with not having staff support, you know, the inability timeline wise to get people up and running. You know, we really want to provide that infrastructure that way for new investigators who are interested in this process, that we can discuss a plan and a course of action to help you reach your goals to create individual thematic research programs. Investment in research personnel for new programs ties into that. We also have long-term research document storage. We have to keep all of those documents in physical form for a period of time, 5 years, 10 years. We don't have the space here on campus, so there is a cost to have them electronically filed but kept physically on hand in case we were ever to be audited. We also pay for research equipment, new technologies, different supplies that's needed for research. You know, several of your printers or laptops, all of those can be utilized with those funding. We have to lease new space, either for coordinators, for faculty, specific to research. Research professional development, CME, publications, travel. Oftentimes, you know, we'll invest in scholarly activity, you know, to help someone out if the practice plan or their own personal funds isn't available. Vendor invoices. Sometimes if we decide to move forward supporting something that is not going to make money but loses money, you know, we may have to pick up the additional expense. Underwriting the startup of new projects will require an investment of the department while we're waiting for the funds to be received. We do have adjunct research appointments. We've partnered a lot with the VA. I know Risa Richardson and her team is a great example where, you know, we'll bring them over to help start their research endeavors here in a partnership with the VA. They get to develop a program here at USF and advance in their rank, while we also partner with VA funding sources, et cetera, and kind of work together. Cost share for faculty salary. So this is a big one, and we see it a lot on the basic research side. So if NIH has an executive level 2 salary cap of $212,100, but a faculty member is making more than that, you know, we have to show that they have 5 to 10% research on that account. So we'll have to cost share. We're looking into ways to be able to do the same thing on startup accounts. You know, the project itself may, or I'm sorry, not startup accounts, but clinical research, clinical research trials, clinical research projects. Amanda can attest that getting started in clinical research, you have to kind of build over time before you really see the direct investment. But we want to be able to provide support and help out. So if we know that you're going to enroll such amount of patients, but the actual project can only pay for 1% of protected time, you know, can we put in some support in cost share to kind of help that provider in focusing their time and attention in that area? Our clinical research bonuses. So the federal NIH bonuses, and I know we'll go over that in a little bit, those are all paid for centrally by the college Office of Research, but the clinical research bonuses are paid for by the department. Medical education support for trainees. We're really excited that a lot of our programs are really starting to dive into integrating research into their training programs. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for our junior folks to get exposure in both academic areas, but we also need to invest in support to help send them to conferences, publish, poster presentations, et cetera. Research sponsored events. I know we've worked with several of the divisions about different research symposiums that they like to host, and oftentimes they'll ask for some support from the department. And then sometimes we have to discuss seed funding or startup support. The Office of Research will ask the department to kick in funds, or maybe we want to invest in somebody that shows a lot of promise ourselves. So hope this gives a little bit of an overview about all of the different uses of what those F&A returns or residuals, that 50% tax that the department has. But as we build over time, we'd like to decrease that number so more goes into your pocket. That is our goal. And then also, have everyone directly benefit from the infrastructure and support centrally. All right, research bonuses. So there is an incentive, not only in protected time from clinical activities or teaching activities, but also there is a bonus structure that the Office of Research helps disseminate. So clinical research bonus, and we can send these out globally for anyone who's interested, but there is a criteria of eligibility for the bonus calculation. I won't go through the full list of criteria, but essentially there is a percentage that you will get returned back based off of the total earnings of the individual trials. All the trials that a principal investigator has throughout the year will be calculated up and paid at the end of the fiscal year as part of a one-time bonus. Several of our faculty are receiving their bonuses this month for activities conducted last year. So here's just an example. It doesn't have names tied to it, but it does show, based off of those calculations, that there's the earnings for fiscal year 23, and then the percentages based off of earnings will give them the running total, and then that is paid directly into their pockets. So incentive for being high achievers. There's also a research funding incentive for federal research. So NIH, you could see that the calculation's a little bit more complicated. There's also criteria of eligibility listed there. So your NIH bonus is based off of what type of grant you have. So is it an R01, R21, or equivalent? Salary savings would be how much of your salary was paid for on the grant, that percentage. Multiplied by the indirect cost rate. So 50% is the new total that we use. And then an economy factor. So the economy factor is always given by the Office of Research just based off of the financial status. I think last year it was 1.3. So that number will change, but ultimately you should be able to plug in the numbers and retroactively go back to see how they calculated to arrive at your number. In the next slide, we have an example. So here again, no names, but if you're looking at some of the folks that received funds, you could see that, that was the cap at the time. That is the cost on the projects covered by grants, indirect cost rate, the economy factor, and then it gets to their total dollar amount. So it can be very lucrative based off of performance. All right, I'll turn it back over to Amanda. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessie. So I'd like to round it out with talking about some recent successes that we have had and then what the future looks like. A few recent successes just this month alone, we as a department have had 11 site selections in October, which I don't have the numbers to represent the previous months, but it was much lower than that. I would say less than 5. We had 3 in pulmonary, 2 in cardiology, 2 in gastroenterology, 1 in hematology, 1 rheumatology, and 1 infectious disease. I think this just shows that we are doing better in getting trials into the department. I think our processes are working, and I think the sooner we can get these trials started, the bigger and more robust our programs will be. But I think this really highlights the processes we've been put in place and the partnership that we've had for startup and with our OCR teams that are working so hard with us. Additional recent successes that we have had, some of our study startup times when we came on board were anywhere from 6, 8, 9, 10. I've even heard of some that were as long as 12 months. We have increased, this says 8 weeks here. We did just open a trial within, I think it was 10 weeks, although it closed right away. So it was a great success for the team and the OCR partnerships that we had. Unfortunately, we were unable to recruit in it because the sponsor closed the trial. But in a more realistic, non-prioritized trial, we're looking like we can get them open in about 5 months. As a more realistic timeline, we'd really like to see that down to 4 months for joint studies between USF and Tampa General and 3 months for USF only when possible. We've done some auditing of open accounts and working to reconcile those, making sure those accounts are paid up so we can get those funds rolled over into the accounts, as Jesse just mentioned. Because there was some outstanding invoices, we were unable to close those accounts out. There are our financial teams and OCR are all working together to make sure that these are updated so that way we can get those outstanding accounts rolled over and then everyone has more money to reinvest in their research. We've developed that North and South Study Coordinator team to support new incoming studies. This is especially important in some of those programs that may only have one clinical trial or have lost teams in the past. Grouping them together helps us use the resources that we have without having to invest in many more staff for only 1 or 2 trials while we build the programs back up. And I think that developing these teams also brings the group together. And I think they're stronger together than they are as a one-off coordinator, like one in nephrology or one in hematology, hoping that that will build teams and also increase staff enjoyment of their role being together as a group. We've increased competitive site selection. We just talked about how many sites we've been selected for this month alone. I think our response times to sponsor, our feasibility questionnaires that are done sooner, our kind of aggressive mentality of trying to get them here to site select us, I think that we're making ourselves become a much more competitive site in the nation, and showing them that we are going to be the site to select moving forward. And I think we're on a good path there. Navigated complex workflow issues. I think coming into this role, there was a lot that needed sorted out, but working with key leaders within the department and OCR, I think we're making great steps forward. We aided in a net positive contribution for study selection. We're really looking to select studies that are going to either help us break even or, we'll have some residuals roll over. And on the USF side, we've increased patient enrollment volumes when they have been limited or non-existent in the past with some staff exits. So what's next? I think this is probably everyone's question. We have some planned hires for fiscal year 24, which started in July. We would like to expand our central services. We want to hire some URAs, or unit research administrators, to help with, reconciliation, invoicing, helping with grant submissions. We want to hire an operations manager. I'm currently interviewing candidates for that to help manage a fiscal and business team to help us with pay distributions, paying invoices, helping those accounts be up to date as much as possible in real time so we can manage our finances more accurately and we can provide that fiscal transparency. We hope to increase our portfolio in cardiology and add another coordinator there. I anticipate the South coordinator team who support pulmonary, nephrology, rheumatology, I expect them to need more staff. We're starting some critical care trials, which I think will require support. So we have a spot open there. And then emergency medicine has transitioned some of their projects over to USF, and they need to hire a few support staff, but then also have some agency staff that will be coming over to support. So it looks like a lot of hiring, but it's a little more of a transition. And there's a dotted line there because we anticipate emergency medicine will be their own department in the future. And then Dr. Youssef, always making my brain think quite a bit. He wanted to know, what does your perfect model look like? What do you want to see? What's your ideal state? And just to share, like, as we round out the rest of the goals for the next year, I just want to share that, my ideal state looks a lot like this. I think a robust centralized team to help provide everyone the administrative assistance that we need to conduct clinical trials is very important. And then you can see a little bit more robust teams here that are supported by assistant directors in the North Clinical Research Team, South Clinical Research Team. And then I do envision that cardiology could grow to be large enough to be their own assistant director supported team with those teams in electrophysio or EP, excuse me, IC, heart failure, imaging, and general cardiology. We have to grow the portfolio to get there, so that's step one. In all of these areas, again, this is a dream ideal state that where we would like to get to in the future. I know we only have like 1 second left, but these are our last 2 slides. Goals and initiatives for the future. We want to build a robust research infrastructure and portfolio to be self-sustaining for the new incoming chair, which we hope to have sometime next year. There's an exciting clinical data management research assistance we hope to be developing with our CDM and health informatics team that can hopefully revolutionize the way that we recruit patients, help us with ICD-10 codes and reports, help us with CPT code and cost assistance when we're trying to build these budgets, which I think is very exciting. We hope to increase, I really hope to increase the portfolios in rheumatology, nephrology, and GIM because right now they're very small or very limited to nothing. Over the next year, hiring and developing a clinical research fiscal operations team. We want to discontinue participation in competing trials. We don't want to open anything that's directly competing with anything else we're working on and underfunded trials without IRA support. And then in the future, I'd really love to host research workshops for new investigators, add research orientation to the faculty onboarding process so the new oncoming faculty can have the information from the start what the resources are here. I'd like to have quarterly research portfolio reviews, hire dedicated research administrators in the divisions, increased recruitment for funded and basic research, and then decrease ultimately, as everyone on the call probably wants to know, decrease overhead on F&A rollovers to put more money into your IRA accounts. That would be the goal. And now that we've talked for an hour and we're 1 minute over, does anyone have any questions before everyone has to drop to their next meeting?
Well, no immediate question for me, but I want to thank you both for this very comprehensive overview of clinical research. I don't know, Dr. Zalm, are we allowed to stay over 5 minutes if people want to ask a question or two?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely. You guys lived up to the billing, a lot of anticipation for this. Thank you so much for a very, very thorough presentation, especially ideal state and you know, the next step before ideal state. And so great job. And thank you for doing this and done in a very quick manner. Fayad mentioned to do this maybe 6 weeks ago or so. So it was put together in a very, very timely fashion. So let's open it up to questions. Absolutely. We'll stick on as long as folks can stay. Go ahead.
Naveen's got his hand up.
Oh, yes.
Naveen,
Hi.
go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Matt and Jesse. A wonderful presentation, and I was waiting for this to come. Yeah, I would definitely looking forward to do the workshop which you talked about because I have a lot of questions and we don't have much time for this. But one question is like, when we go for this meeting, as I was in ASN meeting like yesterday, and I just had to fly back today. But a lot, we were approached by a lot of pharmaceutical companies. But the question is like, how was this? How much far we can go in approaching them, and how do we approach them? Like, how do we go about it? That's most of the the time we get questions like, can I approach this guy? Or can I ask him to come here? Or how do we start these conversations? So that's the first thing which I think we have to be very clear about in starting. And number two, when you think about an investigator startup, like if I have an idea and then if I'm thinking about like, just like simple randomized control trial of this comparing one medicine to other for the management of hypertension, how do we approach these pharmaceutical companies? So those are the things which always I think most of the faculty will have some questions about.
Great questions. I think based on my previous conversations, maybe with you and Dr. Basile, Jesse, that I think one of the questions might be is there any parameters around meeting with pharma companies, like for a dinner or anything like that, to kind of determine their interest? And we want to make sure that we're following those guidelines. I think that's one thing that Dr. Basile's asked before. So I don't know if you know what USF's guidelines are on that.
Yeah, we can send out the policy. There are specific criteria, but it is allowed. For example, like Medtronic was coming to talk about their new technologies. I know that there was a dinner arranged. We have to be very careful when it comes to the financials. Some of it will and won't constitute as outside activities. So if this is something that you're interested in, please by all means let us know and we'll help walk you through what we can and cannot do. But we can also, as part of this, sending out the slides to everyone, we can include that information so that you have a reference tool, at least as a starting point. Great question.
And I can tell you too that I meet with Novartis when new trials come out and some other pharma companies. I'm trying to serve as that interim person that they tell us we have these new trials coming, and then I reach out to you. But if you have someone reaching out to you, I don't think there's any downside of just having a Teams meeting or a conversation with them about what opportunities they have. And I'm even happy to participate in those if you'd like to. Your second question was about what's the process for approaching them if you have ideas with like investigator-initiated trial that you would like funding for. And I don't have exact steps on that, but I do have a few of your colleagues I could connect you with who have done just that recently, who may be able to help us with the steps that they took to receive funding for trials like that.
Right. And thank you very much for the answer. And then just one comment is like, I know when you talk about this clinical trials, we are one of the sites. So the problem here, which I see, is most of the time when we are approached by this clinical trial people, we are probably midway through that trial and we have trouble, in getting enrolled and completing or getting things done on time because we don't know. So what procedure we have to catch these things early, and like, how do we approach that? We know these things are happening like firsthand.
That's a good question. We have actually started in our startup process that when we become site selected or during that feasibility process, we actually ask them which step of that trial they are in. How close are you to closing enrollment? Or have you started recruiting patients? So that way we're not taking on trials we do not feel we can open in an adequate amount of time to be productive on the trial. So we're starting those conversations early now, and I'm hoping now that we're decreasing our site selection timeframes that we can get on the early end of the beginning of these trials rather than waiting towards the tail end.
Thank you. That's it.
Yep.
All right, Anthony Canella.
Good afternoon, ladies. Outstanding presentation. I have a comment and a suggestion for not only you guys, but the whole department. One of the things that, I've seen along my path, which is I've been across the continent now for a while, is that, a lot of people, there's a lot of inter-divisional research on certain topics. One of the things I would see right now, we're in a transition phase, without a permanent chairperson, et cetera. I understand that. But it would be nice to have a list of faculty who are interested in who are doing research currently. What are their projects? This could be behind a firewall. Okay, I get it. And people want to have some type of, protection over their science. I'm like that too. But I would like to collaborate with other faculty if possible. And because we're spread out at 3 different campuses with 3 different emails, and 4 actually, if you think about it. And so it would be nice to have that kind of database so that then people could actually, and 1, everybody would know what the devil they're, what everybody else is doing. And 2, to be able to talk about it and have a forum to discuss it. Yeah, you could go to your division director. Yeah, you could do this. Yeah, you could do that. I hear all that. But it's also nice for faculty to discuss these kinds of things where it's not just rushed right after you see a patient. Hey, I want to talk with you about this. That's a non-starter. It doesn't help, and it's not going to generate science, and it's not going to generate hypothesis-driven projects. And I'm talking about extramural funding here. I'm not talking about just getting something from pharma. So I think that's a suggestion that I would have. I would like to see. I've seen that at UF and at UC San Diego previously, and I think it would really help try to be a lightning rod for science, not just at the VA where I'm at or at Moffitt where I'm at most of the time, but for everyone.
What division
Yeah.
are you in?
ID.
I'm in
Okay.
ID in international medicine.
So,
Okay.
sorry, Amanda, could I take this one? I have some comments. I'm actually really glad that you brought that up because I think this is more of a global issue that I know Dr. Liggett and Matt Anderson and Rachel as well are looking to tackle. I know we would love to kind of spearhead departmentally what we could do because you bring up a very good point. We already have a lot of themes that lots of you guys participate in, but you're kind of siloed in your own subspecialty divisions. HIV is a great example. Sepsis is another. There's a multitude of them. So we can talk about workshops and also collaborative meetings that are possibly thematic, and kind of expand from there. The other thing that I wanted to point out too is that, there are lots of resources across campus. There's lots of core facilities. There's even grant writers that are paid for by the MCOM Office of Research. And I don't think a lot of that information is disseminated very well for you guys to know like what is available in-house. I know we have a lot of vendors and vendor relationships, like metabolomics, for example. There's other things where we partner with other institutions at discounted rates. I think there's a lot. I mean, even creating a research page where it just has resources and templates available would be kind of a future strategy. I think.
I agree with you, Jess. I think that, I mean, I didn't mean to interrupt you mid-predicate, but I wanted to plug something because I think it's important. So one of the things I did about a year ago for the fellowship, and it's already been a lightning rod for research, is that I helped to create an interdisciplinary conference once a month where an ID fellow presents a case, and then subsequently we have a scientist rather, from the College of Arts and Sciences in the biology department come over, and either a grad student, postdoc, or a faculty member will talk about that organism and the science behind it. Both Kami Kim and I have already started projects with some of those scientists because of that. It might also behoove us to talk with, the people under the dean and say, could this also happen with molecular medicine and pharmacology and some of the other departments in the College of Medicine, where then you can have, again, I'm also doing that with somebody at the College of Pharmacy now with a grant here at the VA, a seed grant. And it would be nice to be able to do this across campuses instead of being, within, my territory west of Bruce B. Downs. So again, another thing where, faculty can do that, and this way it can be a lightning rod to really try and improve not only the science, but also the portfolio of said faculty members. I'll shut up now.
No, I think there's a lot to be done there. I know just recently, I see Dr. Wilson on, he can attest. I mean, we were able to get him and Risa Richardson connected about medical anthropology, because I was aware that that was something he was interested in, and she was looking for an academic home. So I think that has developed into a fruitful partnership. I know for COVID, I was able to get Dr. Samboomwick connected to somebody in mathematics and statistics who did app development, cryptography type stuff, or something they were looking into in population health. So it's definitely a need as we try to move forward on an endeavor to be a top tier research institution. Internally, I know Dr. Van Leveren and Yusuf have talked about, moving towards kind of faculty committees where we can spearhead a lot of these things, partnering with the administrative teams. Lectures would be great. Training workshops is another. So fantastic feedback. Thank you so much for that. But we're definitely going to take notes and
I would just piggyback on that if I may, which is,
yeah.
One of the first things we have to do is get all of our departmental research centralized. Right now it's in the head of these two young ladies, and if they know what's going on, they can redirect or make connections. Dr. Zaman, I've already talked about having at least 2, if not more, research symposium days. So at grand rounds like this, investigators can get 5 minutes to present, 2 minutes for Q&A. And if you're listening, you go, wow, that sounds interesting. You can follow up offline. So I think, I think, Dr. Cannell, that's a wonderful idea. We need to get to that state. It starts with getting things formalized internally, centralized, running all of your ideas through Amanda, and then if she can handle it, great. And if she needs to offload it or partner with Tampa General and Rachel, fantastic, we'll do that. We just need to have one voice when it comes to the research, who can then help organize conferences, meetings. The Neuroscience Institute, you're talking about molecular medicine. We have those things already going on at the NSI, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, exactly what you're describing. So it's very, very possible, but we need some organization, and that's what they're trying to accomplish with, on their own, but with this meeting. 1:15, I don't want to take up too much more time. Your emails, everybody knows your emails, your contact? All right, so this was fantastic. Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Lozama, Jen, for organizing it. I'll leave closing remarks to you, Joe.
No, thank you, and appreciate everyone's feedback. And absolutely, Amanda and Jesse, will be glad to take your emails. Thank you for incredible feedback from Dr. Naveen and Dr. Cannella. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week for another Grand Rounds. Have a great day.